Welcome to week 2 of our public speaking class. Last week, we set you up to memorize some poems as an introduction to this. We have a few people who are going to recite poems for the rest of us. So you lucky few get to essentially be the guinea pig on what we need to learn in order to all improve, and that is some speaker evaluation techniques, I guess, categories, ways to give feedback. Because very often, I'm sure you've had this experience, you and someone else are talking about something you heard, something you saw, something you watched, someplace you went, and you have this kind of conversation. What do you think? It was good. What do you think? Yeah, it was good. This isn't tremendously helpful. So what we need to do is we need to get into a little bit more of what makes something good or less good in terms of public speaking and presentation. So pull out a fresh sheet of paper. And we're going to look at 4 categories. And these are not in any particular order in terms of importance. But these are what are on these little evaluation forms we're going to be using. So these are the words you're going to see. So first thing we want to do is define each word, as well as give some general areas within that that you could comment on, make observations, things like that. Okay, poise. Who could define this word? Amy, poise?
Kind of how you hold yourself.
How you hold yourself, good. Anyone want to add to that?
Your posture.
Posture, definitely. Add to that.
How you move to a certain extent.
Okay, so posture, movement. I'm not sure how to put hold yourself outside of that, but let's keep looking for a few more words. What else might fall into that area of poise? Any others? Yes. Hunter?
Mannerisms?
Say again?
Mannerisms?
Sure, we could go with that. Can you give me a specific idea of what you mean when you say that?
Kind of just like how you move or how you kind of stand or sit in a certain or specific way.
Okay, good. Nathan?
Your demeanor.
Demeanor, how would you explain that?
The way you act or interact with regards to your expression.
Expression, all right. What would be some expressions that would fall into that category?
Smiling.
Okay, so there's smiling. Have you ever noticed the power of a smile? You should do a little research on this. Find various people in your life and just experiment with smiling at them. Because if you smile at someone long enough, it's almost impossible for them to not smile back. And if they don't smile back, it's probably because they're trying so hard not to smile, they end up cracking up and laughing about how hard they're trying not to smile back. But most everyone has a positive reaction to smiling. So expression, smiling. What other things could you do with your face or your body that might fall into that category of poise?
Gestures?
Gestures, sure. Have you ever seen someone who uses the same gesture again and again and again? And it seems like every point they have to make, it's this one repetitive motion, which can be even worse if they have both hands have to do that. You're like, just stop for a minute. So skillful use of gestures, that can be tricky. Anything else? Mm-hmm.
Habits like twitching or messing with your hair.
Yes. There could be habits that people have. Do I have any habits? I think so. Yes.
When I'm nervous, I tend to fiddle with like jacket drawstrings or whatever.
Oh, clothes. Yep. Yep, that's a possibility. Get your hands in your pockets. So you want to avoid distractions there. Good. Any other things? That's a pretty good list. So when you are looking at someone and listening to them, and you're preparing to give them some more detailed feedback, you wouldn't write poise, good, right? You would perhaps try to find at least one positive thing, and then if there's something that could be improved, you could add that as well, right? So you might say something like, general posture and body control, excellent, but please smile. Okay, so that's going to be the first category, poise. Okay, the word locution. Anyone know what this means? We hear it in a couple different contexts, perhaps. Lydia?
I know what the word elocution means.
Mm-hmm. Which would be?
Decorations of your writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so elocution is generally your style, right? Your decorations, the stylistic techniques you use, the schemes, tropes, stuff like that. Same root, this one, locution without the E, we generally take to mean the vocalization or the actual speaking. With the E, and they're both from the same Latin verb, loquor, which means to speak or to speak out, right? So in this case, what are some things you might consider as you're listening to the voice? What are some things you might evaluate? Josiah.
Different tone.
Okay. So tones. And when you talk about tones, you're thinking what's good, what's not good. What would be kind of a hard to listen to tone?
Just like monotone, same all the time.
Kind of a monotonous sound, same pitch. And you very quickly grow tired of that. Have you noticed that? Very quickly, we start to tune out. So variety, right? Some going up tones, some going down tones, some going up and then down and then up. Also using volume. That can have a good effect too. For example, so if I lower my voice, what happens? Everyone has to kind of listen a little harder. And then I can say whatever I wanted to say, and a better chance that you would. But if you speak too quietly the whole time, then pretty soon people just give up. I'm never going to hear that. Okay, what else? Tone, volume, what else could come? Yes, Levi.
Eloquence, like the kinds of words that are used.
In some cases, yes. We'll put that down. Although you mostly would think of that over here in the content side. And then this varies a little bit. If it's a memorized speech, you didn't necessarily improve vocabulary on the spot, especially if someone else wrote it, right? If it's an impromptu speech, then that would be very much connected perhaps with the content. So tone, volume, what else? Yes, Lydia.
Inflection.
inflection, what would that be?
Like how you move your voice along with your words.
So a little bit on the tone and volume. This would also probably include what, rhythm? So kind of like rhythm, Lydia? If someone talks too fast and it's going, 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 and you have a hard time hearing, that's tough. Someone's too slow, that's tough. So variety, again, variety is good. Does anyone like to play hangman? You can always win a hangman game with this word. Because what does everybody do? A-E-I-O-U. There's no A-E-I-O-U. Impossible. Then they go, oh yeah, Y. It could be a vowel too. They get one Y. They're lost. And they're already, several arms and a leg down. All right. So tone, volume, vocabulary to some degree. Inflection, meaning rhythm, and then a combination kind of tone and volume. What else? Yes.
Vocal clarity.
Clarity, yes. And some people naturally articulate more clearly than others. And it's not necessarily even because of training or home. I've met two kids in one family, one of whom seems to speak very clearly. The other one has a mumbling tendency. So you kind of have to know, where do you fall in that range? So clarity and enunciation. All right, good. Anything else pertaining to the voice that you can think of? Part of volume and part of clarity is something that we could throw over here, but we'll put it here, and that would be projection. Projection isn't necessarily just volume. For example, I could speak very loud right here, but I'm not necessarily doing the same thing as if I speak a little less loud, but I put my voice out to the very back of the room. And so there's that feeling that you can put your voice out. So sometimes if I'm speaking in a room, with a lot of people, hundreds of people, it's not a problem because I have a microphone. If you don't have a microphone, it can be a problem. But even when you do have a microphone, people have the sense, is your voice reaching them? It's almost like an arc. And you can even imagine as you're speaking this arc of sound and energy going out from you as far as you want to. But I'd stay within the room because once you get out into the street, it's really problematic. All right, contact. That would be what kinds of things? Yes, Noah.
Eye contact.
Sure. So eye contact. What's your goal? When you have an audience and you're thinking about connecting or contacting with all the people, what should be your goal?
To get to as many people as you can.
To get to as many people as you can. Now, in a small group, if you have just a dozen like we have here, I can pretty much hit everybody's eyes once every 20 to 30 seconds. So you would likely, if you're looking at me, you would likely feel me touching you visually, eye to eye, about that often. Maybe it's going a little longer, but I wouldn't want to go more than a couple minutes, right? Because what happens is if you just kind of talk to one person and you're just so happy because that person is smiling at you and they look like they're interested and they might even laugh at the next joke you tell, and so you're just so happy about that person, how does everyone else feel at that moment?
Left out.
A little left out. So now, if you have a larger audience, or it'll work in a smaller audience, but it's particularly important with a larger audience, you need zones, right? So you have a room full of people, and so you say, okay, there's maybe 9 zones. And so you pick a person, probably the friendliest person in that zone, and you look at them, and you look at them, you look at the next person, and you kind of, because you can't look at 300 people, but you're far enough away that if you look at one, the person right next to him kind of feels like, oh, he's looking at me too. You can also go cross-eyed, and then nobody knows that you're looking at them. So, eye contact, you'd like to touch base with everyone, or at least each zone of your room. But there are other ways to contact with an audience, to touch them. How do I reach out and touch you? Lydia?
With emotional, putting emotion into your voice.
Okay. And so that would go to here and here to a degree, but there's emotion that comes through almost in a nonverbal, non-visual way, too. The use of small, subtle little expressions. Now, you may not know what I was trying to do, but you could sense a change, could you not? So there's that, how the emotion comes through. Very subtle difference. What else in terms of contacting? Yes, no?
Interaction, like with asking questions.
Absolutely. Now, sometimes that is appropriate. Questions. In a more formal situation, you can't necessarily do that, but you can do something close to as effective. And I learned this early in my career, and it's been so very useful. If I'm speaking to a group of people and I ask them a question, but they cannot answer because of the room and the logistics and the formality level, I want to give them a nonverbal response mechanism, right? So how many of you have noticed that many times when I ask you a question, I will raise my hand? Have you ever seen me do that? I'm not raising my hand because I want to say, I know the answer. No, I'm raising my hand because I want you to raise your hand. And it's just fascinating. I've tried this, and I've got some talks, and I do this talk very similarly. I've tried different audiences. If I never raise my hand, I don't get a feeling of connection. If I get them to start raising their hand, then instantly there's more rapport. Do you see? So, so there's also nonverbal ways that you can communicate. Anything else about contact? This idea might connect with poise a little bit. In fact, we kind of talked it over here. Movement, right? If you go to a conference or you observe people speaking, there's oftentimes 2 types. One type says, here is where I must stay. And there's, a lectern or maybe a microphone, and you're just kind of stuck there. And you can live with that, but it's not nearly as good as having the freedom to be able to move. Now, just because there's a lectern there doesn't mean you can't move, right? This thing is actually a music stand, but we'll call it a lectern. This thing is here. I could stay behind it. But do I have to? Couldn't I take a step out and get close as the space will permit? And move over to the side and reach out to the back and wave to the faraway people and then return to home base. So you have a lot of freedom of motion as long as you're not restricted by either your notes or a microphone that you can't move in front of. So, movement. But not just general movement in terms of being controlled, but intentional movement in terms of connecting, contacting. Good. Anything else under that people do to draw you in? To make you feel happy? Yes, Josiah.
If you're restricted to stay in one place, could you like rotate towards people? Just
Yes, absolutely. You can cheat. Which basically, okay, here's your microphone. If I want to go there, but I can't go, what can I do?
just rotate towards the
I would just rotate. So Nathan, what do you think about that? Here, lean in a little bit, right? And I'm still right where that microphone is, but he feels my motion. And then I shift over. All right. Okay, now last category, content. Okay, that is where most people start, which is this interesting, right? So, what are some things that make speeches or presentations interesting? That's a word we use, but let's get in a little bit. Nathan.
Personal relevance.
Okay. Do we share something? Can you relate to my story? Can you relate to my teaching? Or do I know something about you where I can immediately relate back to you? Yeah. Good. Okay. What else? What else makes it interesting?
Jokes.
Humor. The best kind of humor is the humor that is not obviously, I'm going to tell you a joke, which is what I do a lot. Because I used to, of course, start many classes with jokes. The other kind of humor is when you can sneak it in and it kind of embeds into the talk. And I've noticed that even if you try to say something funny and not everybody thinks it's funny, if you smile like, that was so good, then the people who didn't get it, they just kind of smile anyway, and you look like, aced it. Yeah, but you got to be careful, because some humor might just totally flop, in which case you just pretend you didn't do that. But, all right, what else? What makes it interesting? Relevance, humor. Yes?
Stories.
Stories. Why do we like stories so much?
They're personal.
They're personal.
They create emotion.
They can build emotional impact to it. Amy?
They're easier to remember later on.
Yes. If you go and you hear a speech, odds are if your mom or dad or your friend says, so what did he talk about? You will remember the story that was said. Nevaeh.
We like to relate to them. The stories.
Oh, because of shared experience.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, shared experience or imagined experience. Also, there are some speeches that you might give that you do not write yourself. So you're not really responsible for the content, right? Some of you may be now or at some time in the future involved in competitive speech and debate. And there's a whole category of speeches called interpretive, where you are not writing the speech, but you're kind of acting the speech. You're interpreting or demonstrating how that speech could be given. So in terms of the content, if it's original, you would content on what you liked or did not like about the actual relevance and humor and stories. If it's an interpretive speech, then what would you look at for content? You might say what?
How it's presented?
Okay, so the presentation, and that's kind of everything here. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? You want to get a good grade on the project? No. In reality. Yes, Hunter?
Be dramatic?
You want to have some good drama in there, right? So is there some dramatic interp? And that would include then other things like voice and body use. You might even go one step further and use different voices. So some interpretive speeches will have more than one character, or there'll be a narrator and a character voice, in which case you can use a different voice. How many of you like to read to other people? Anybody? And when you do that, or I guess I should say, how many of you like to be read to as well? Do you enjoy it when you can kind of imagine the character and the voice going together? A well-done audiobook is very nice because the reader, who often is an actor of sorts, can put a particular voice with a particular character, and then you always know who's talking, and it helps you visualize the whole thing, doesn't it? So, all right, so those are a few thoughts, and we can add to that as we go. Now, I have these little speaker evaluation forms, and I'm going to give each of you 4 of them because we're going to have 4 people recite their poem. And if you are at home, you have a piece of paper where these are not cut apart. So, as you see, this is a very, very simple form and a little bit of space for you to be able to put in whatever helpful suggestions you can. And as I said previously, we want to always find a strong point for each of the 4 categories. And then if there's a weak point, you can comment on that as well. Or if you have 2 strong points and a weak point. But you want to do the opposite of writing good, 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 which I have seen. Or bad, 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 which I have not seen and I don't want to see, even if it's terrible. All right. So homework from last week was to memorize one of the 4 poems. Is that correct? And so we have some volunteers, or as a good friend of mine likes to say, voluntolds, to do the speech. So let me get the microphone. And when you come up, you are welcome to adjust this however you like. Although this is not an option. So, ideally, you want this to be at the height where if you had a piece of paper, you could see it easily. Now, in this case, you've memorized it. So the only thing you really have to worry about, not this, is this. This just makes everyone feel a little bit safer. The other thing you can do is if you catch yourself using your hands in a distracting way. Then what you can do is you can hold the lectern. If you put too much weight on it. But you put your hands somewhere so they're not doing something they shouldn't. Okay, most of you I think are beyond that stage, but it is helpful to have it. Also can be a prop, right? If you had a story about driving a car. All right. we are going to start with the first poem with Jack. So, Jack, when you come up, say the poem and the author, and then deliver the poem, and then we'll give everyone a few minutes to reflect on Jack's delivery and give him a few pointers. All right? Okay. So, Jack, it's yours.
The Yak by Hilaire Belloc. As a friend to the children, commend me the yak. You will find it exactly the thing. It will carry and fetch. You can ride on its back or lead it about with a string. The Tartar who dwells on the plains of Tibet, a desolate region of snow, has for centuries made it a nursery pet, and surely the Tartar should know. Now tell your papa where the yak can be got, and if he is awfully rich, he will buy you the creature, or else he will not. I cannot be positive which.
Very nice. Thank you. Okay, next, according to my schedule, we have Nathan reciting The Hen.
The Hen by Oliver Herford. Alas, my child, where is the pen which can do justice to the hen? Like royalty, she goes her way, laying foundations every day, though not for public buildings, yet for custard, cake, and omelet. Or, if too old for such a use, they have their fling at some abuse, as when, to censure plays unfit, upon the stage they make a hit, or, at elections, seal the fate of an obnoxious candidate. No wonder, child, we prize the hen, whose egg is mightier than the pen.
In doing this, has anyone noticed anything they could add to this collection of ideas? Nathan?
Pacing,
Pacing.
not speeding through it like I do.
Yeah, so that would be kind of right here with inflection and rhythm. Pacing. Did you feel like you were going a little fast?
Yes, I do. Anything I'm nervous about, get through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, on the presentation side, I was thinking, it didn't come to my mind with Jack's because the poem was much simpler. This poem had some subtlety. So, did the speaker communicate well an understanding of the poem, right? So, do you have a good understanding? And I might not know exactly what every word I hear means, but if Nathan has a good understanding and that's transferred to me, I will understand the whole a little bit better, even if I can't catch every word or understand the meaning of every word. All right, I think next we have Madison with a third poem. So pull out a third piece there, third evaluation form. Whenever you are ready.
Sea Fever by John Masefield. I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea in the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by, and the wheels kick, and the wind song, and the white sails shaking, and a gray mist on the sea's face, and a gray dawn breaking. I must go down to the seas again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied. To the flown spray and the blown spume and the seagulls crying. I must go down to the seas again, to the vagrant gypsy life, to the gull's way and the whale's way, and the winds like a whetted knife. And all I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and a quiet sleep and sweet dream when the long trick's over.
Okay, so next we have Josiah, who's going to do the last of the four. So come on up.
The Maldive Shark by Herman Melville. About the shark, phlegmatical one, pale sot of Maldive Sea, the sleek little pilotfish, azure and slim, how alert in attendance be. From his saw-pitted mouth, from his charnel of mow, they have nothing of harm to dread, but liquidly glide on his ghastly flank or before his Gorgonian head. Or lurk in the port of serrated teeth and white trifle tears of glittering gates, and there find a haven where perils abroad, an asylum in jaws of the fates. They are friends, and friendly they guide him to prey, but never partake of the treat. Eyes and brains of the doter lethargic and dull, pale ravener of horrible meat.
Good. Okay, great. Everyone has done that. How about some general comments pertaining to any or all of the speakers? What are some of the things you wrote down? Without saying the name of the person, just some things that you wrote down or noticed. Anybody? Noah?
Generally, it was kind of quiet, especially at the very start.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I would agree. Everyone was pretty quiet, and that's natural. You're a little bit shy, not used to it. And Noah's sitting in the back there, so he's going to be the most sensitive to volume. Good. Nathan?
Everyone was very stiff.
Did you feel stiff?
I felt stiff.
Levi?
A lot of them had a hard time with eye contact.
So you were sitting on the edge, and I was too. And so a lot of times people are okay in this zone because it's kind of safe, but to expand out to the sides takes a little bit of effort or concentration. So good, excellent. Anything else that you might have noticed? Anything particularly good that you saw and you thought, oh, that was good? Yes, Josiah.
I think that clarity was good.
Yeah, all the enunciation, you could pretty well hear each word. So that was a plus. Okay. Okay. Pull out a fresh sheet of paper. How many of you would say that in general, it's easy for you to memorize things like this? How many of you would say, it takes more work than I wish I had to spend to memorize stuff like this? Anybody? Okay. Now, as the speeches get a little bit longer, the memorization part gets a little bit tougher. So I wanted to share with you a couple memorization techniques that would help you, particularly with poetry like this, or poetical speeches to some degree. The first thing you've got to know, and I'm sure you experienced this if you did the Maldive Shark or the Hen, you can't necessarily just kind of keep reading it through again and again from the beginning, then beginning, then beginning, then. That's harder. What's the better way to go about memorizing the poem? Josiah?
Read it in like some chunks.
Chunk it, exactly. Get the first part memorized solid, and then start worrying about the next part. Then you've got the foundation to work on. If you don't have a small enough chunk, and you constantly have to keep going back to remind yourself, it won't be as efficient. And the chunks can be any size you like. It could be a stanza. It could be 2 lines. It could be 1 sentence, right? And so it would be better to work on 1 sentence and get that totally solid, then add the next sentence, work on that, get that totally solid, say those two, add the third, get that totally solid, recite those three, and just go real slow at the beginning. And it is kind of, a graph where it starts out pretty slow, and then it goes a little faster and a little faster and a little faster. So generally, the first part of the speech when you try to memorize is harder than the last part. At least I have found that to be the case. So chunk it. That's the most important thing. It's there now. Okay, let's read this through once, and I will ask you a few questions. I think some of you will recognize it. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you that Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Who's heard that one? Yeah, Levi, where's it from?
I actually don't know the name, but it's Shakespeare.
Shakespeare, good.
I believe it's actually Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar, yes, the historical play by Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. Have any of you seen a movie or read the thing? Or this is possibly one of the most famous first lines in all of literature. Almost everyone will have heard this at some point before, they get too old, I trust, at least for a while. And of course, the entire nature of this is it's half poem, half speech. It is not, and we cannot even imagine exactly what was said in ancient Rome, because Shakespeare did not have an historical record to work with. So he's imagining all of the scenarios, situations, and dialogue around Julius Caesar's life and death. So if you recall, the play opens, Caesar's triumphantly returned from battle where he defeated the sons of Pompey who had tried to overthrow him. Other Roman senators are worried that Caesar might gain absolute power. So they end up plotting Caesar's death and carrying out the assassination at the Capitol on the very famous day. Anyone remember?
Ides of March?
The Ides of March. You might wonder, what are Ides? And why are there only Ides and not just one Ide? It's the very middle day of the month is the Ides. At least that's one definition. Although Mark Antony, one of Caesar's friends, says he is committed to the conspirators, he determines to speak at Caesar's funeral and incite the crowd against the men who murdered Caesar. Brutus speaks first, and the crowd is very sympathetic to him, but then Antony shows up with Caesar's body and gives this speech, which goes on. It's longer than what I'm giving you. And it essentially kind of uses a reverse psychology to move the crowd and change their opinion. It's an example of one of the great pieces of persuasive rhetoric that have ever been written. So in this first one, he's basically saying, the noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. So he's saying Brutus is a noble man, right? A few words that might pop out here. This one, interred. Anyone know what that one mean? Yeah, Levi?
Buried, entombed.
Good. So interred would mean buried. So the good that men do is oft buried with their body, is that point there. And then here, if it were so, it was a grievous. Or how would you translate that? Grievous, or what would be a synonym for that?
Sad, sorrowful.
Sad, sorrowful, serious.
Terrible.
Terrible. And of course, terribly, Caesar answered to this charge of being ambitious. So whenever you're going to interpret something, you want to be sure that you have looked up and understand all the words. With Shakespeare, it's a little tough because sometimes there are antiquated words, meaning out of use, too old, we don't use them anymore, or even expressions or idioms that we don't use on a daily basis. This word hath is clearly one of those. And what does it mean?
Has.
Has. So why didn't they write has? Why didn't Shakespeare do that?
Because hath sounds cooler.
Exactly. Yes. Hath sounds cooler. I don't know. So that's the kind of antiquated word you would find in things written a few hundred years ago. Any question about that at all? Okay, so now what I would like to do is practice a little bit of memorizing with you using a couple techniques. The first would be the disappearing word technique. Have you ever used this to study anything? So the way it works is you chunk it. So let's just work with these first two sentences right here. Okay, that's all we're going to attempt to memorize at this moment. And we would say, okay, let's read it one time through. So everyone out loud. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Okay, this should be super easy because the first line is so famous, you probably heard it or maybe already memorized it. But what you would do is start wiping out some words, right? Now to do this, you would be best to have a whiteboard. If you have a large whiteboard at home and you can commandeer it for your purposes, then what I would do is put the chunk you're trying to memorize on the whiteboard and then you can erase very easily. If you're doing it on paper, it's a little bit harder. But you would basically say, okay, let's get rid of a word there. So that one's gone. We will take out that word because that is a super easy one. All right, now let's say it again. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Okay, now we can be a little more aggressive. Let's wipe out some more words. Okay, now there's 3 missing from each line.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
Okay, did anyone stumble on that? Okay, so praise. So you might just do it again right now so that when you hit that blank, it's there the second time. We'll assume that was easy, and we'll keep erasing. And it's sometimes helpful to put blanks where the words would be, just so you don't forget one. All right, see if we can do it.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
Perfect, very easy. All right, now we just get rid of a few more. All right, can you do it? Go.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
Okay, close your eyes and try it. Friends,
Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
Okay, now, as you say it this time, imagine where you are. You are Mark Antony. You are standing next to the body of the dead, recently assassinated, greatest man who ever lived in Rome, right? And you are talking to a whole audience that has just heard Brutus talk about, how ambitious and terrible Caesar was, which is why we had to get rid of him, right? Okay, so now close your eyes and imagine There's a huge mass of people in front of you, and most of them are wearing togas. The freshly murdered body of Caesar right next to you on your right side. There's no microphone. You take your place and you speak. Ready, go.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
Boom, you just got the first two done. That didn't take too long. Now, if you practice that again today or tonight and then tomorrow and the next day, you'll lock it in really well. How many repetitions? 3, 4, maybe 4 or 5 here, 6 by 1 tonight, 7, 1 in the morning, a couple more, 8 or 9 repetitions, you'll have the whole thing probably. If not, maybe a couple more. All right, so that's the first idea for memorizing a couple lines of something, is you can use the disappearing word technique. Right? You can also chunk it even smaller if you want to. I don't like this method quite as well because if you recite it the way you memorized it, it can come out in chunks and blocks that are not natural. So you'd say, okay, half the words, the evil, approximately half the words, the evil that men do, the evil that men do, the evil that men do, the evil that men do. And then you can do this one, lives after them, lives after them, lives after them, lives after them. And then you can put it together. The evil that men do, lives after them. Then you have to reduce the space you artificially created. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. Okay, so you can chunk it like that. So that's another strategy. So this is the disappearing word trick. We'll call it the DWT. This is the chunk. Then another very handy technique is to look at the first word of each sentence if you're going to forget what comes next. In a poem, you're less likely to forget what comes next because of the predictable rhyming and rhythmic patterns. In this case, it doesn't have the same rhyme or rhythm. It's still like poetry, but it doesn't help you the way poetry does with those elements. So what here you might do is say, okay, the first word was friends. And then you have I, and then you have the. And so you could just think about those 3 words. Those are the first 3 lines you've got to get, okay? So close your eyes and see if you can remember those 3 words. First line was?
Friends.
Friends. Second was?
I.
Third?
The.
The. All right, let's see if we can say the whole thing, all 3 lines, nonstop. You can open or close your eyes, whichever you like. I think it's better to close because then you can imagine all those guys in togas. Maybe the hot sun beaming down. Maybe there's, what was I thinking of? Something that would be, there were probably a bunch of horses there. And the horses would, of course, have left their droppings. So there's horse droppings to smell, sweaty people in togas, bright sunshine beating down on your face, and the soon-to-begin decomposing body of the great man. Okay, let's try it now. Do you remember the 3 words in the lines? Ready, go. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. Okay, so we are a little rusty on that one, so we would want to add that in. And then what you can do is you can gradually just make a little mnemonic for the first word of each sentence, or in this case, the first line in each stanza. So you would gradually build up with a combination of that. All right, so this would be the first line technique. So you do it, and you chunk, and you flit. Do it, chunk, flit, you get through it. Okay, so in addition, and this is a technique which I do not use because I'm not good at it. It's not part of the way I think or remember very well. But some people do very well with this, and that is to create a little image in your mind for each line. Now, that's going to be more helpful with what comes next, less helpful with the line itself. But part of the challenge is in a poem or a speech, you get to the end of a sentence or a line, and then you're kind of, what's next, what's next, what's next? And you get a little panic, right? So if you have an image you can go straight to in a sequence. So what image would give you this one? Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. What would you consider? A picture, yes.
A bunch of people in togas removing their ears and giving them to a guy on a podium.
All right, there you go. Does that look like an ear?
No.
This is why I don't do this technique. I can't draw ears. Is that better?
No.
Better.
At least he's happy.
Yeah, so this is why I don't. But okay, so you got a guy in a toga ripping his ear off, all right? I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. What image could you attach with that?
I'll do it with a shovel instead of raising his hands,
A shovel, okay. I can draw a shovel, I think. Does that look shovelly enough?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got guy ripping off his ear and a shovel. Okay, the evil that men do lives after them. What could we come up with for that? Evil. Yes, Nevaeh?
Little creature with horns.
A little creature with horns. You're taxing my... Okay, I'm sure you can do better, but that's the best I can do for a little creature with horns, all right? The good is oft interred with their bones.
An angel-like figure in a tomb.
Angel-like? No, it's got to be something I can actually draw.
Halo over a dead
halo.
body.
A halo. Okay, I could probably do a halo. So the halo goes with the bones. Okay, you can do this better than me, and you don't have to draw it well. You just have to imagine it, right? So then, once all of that is gone, and all you need to do is remember the order of the statements or sentences or lines, then your little pictures would go. Now, without looking, close your eyes. What was the picture for the top?
An ear. Guy ripping.
Guy ripping off ear. What was the next picture?
Shovel.
Shovel. What was the third picture?
Butterfly.
A little devil for evil. What was the fourth picture?
A halo.
With bones. Okay, let's see if we can do it now. All nonstop. Just if we need a reminder, we have those images. Ready? Go.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
The evil men
That men
do
do
lives
often
after
lives
them.
after
The good
them,
is often
but the
interred
good
with their
is
bones.
often interred with their bones.
Good, excellent, beautiful. So you've got all 4 lines. And again, if you repeat that a couple times today before you go to sleep, and a couple times in the next few days, you'll remember it all. If you don't do that, and you wait 4 or 5 or 6 days, you pretty much will start over, and you'll need more repetitions total. So you can capitalize on the start you've got. Then, of course, you would do the same thing with the next 4 lines. So I don't know which of those techniques are going to be helpful, but that would be the beginning of some memory techniques that you can use when you are attempting to memorize things. Because homework will be to memorize one additional stanza of this particular speech. Unless you'd like to do the whole thing. Okay, a stanza is one group of lines. And these are all the same, almost all the same length. Some are slightly longer or shorter. But I wanted you to practice memorizing a stanza of this speech. It's not a poem in the same way the other one was, but it is poetic in its use of language. And you can try one or more of the techniques. We have the
Disappearing word.
disappearing word. We have the
Chunk.
chunk. We have the
First letter of a line.
First line.
first letter
Technique.
technique. I forgot what I wrote. The first letter technique. And then if you need to put the lines in order, you can use the images. Good enough? All right. And I don't care which ones you do. It would be nice if we had at least 3 people do 3 different ones, and then we could do the whole thing next week. All right? So we're starting off slow and gentle and easy. Let's just read it through once so you get the whole sense of it. And this isn't the entire speech. The whole thing is several pages long. So that's next week. She might have actually believed me. All right. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me, but Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? What does that mean, by the way? Ransoms did the general coffers fill. Who could translate that? Nathan?
The ransoms basically kept the government with a steady supply of money.
Yeah, so the coffers are the treasury, essentially, the boxes full of money that the government, the general coffers, so the public treasury. And ransomed, all those people they captured during the war, they tried to sell them back to whoever would pay for them. When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious. And Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal, I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure, he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me. My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me. Notice the power of the repetition. And yet, Brutus is an honorable man. So his goal in this speech is to basically discredit Brutus and the gang that murdered Caesar for having done the wrong thing, because, of course, what happens to Mark Antony eventually? Do you know?
It's coming.
Nathan?
I believe he surpasses Caesar and becomes king of Rome.
Well, he becomes one of the triumvirate. And Antony was most famous because he ran off to play with Cleopatra. And more importantly, Shakespeare wrote a whole play about Mark Antony. So, all right. So there you have it. 4 stanzas. The first one we practice with. You choose one of the others. All right? Okay. Now, we do have to do one more thing before we finish up today. And this will be in preparation for next week. But this is, I think, mostly review for most of you. And that would be the structure of a simple speech. Now, we're not talking about something very, very advanced like Shakespeare wrote in this play, which is poetic and strategic. We're talking about what happens when you've got to just get started standing up in front of people and talking. So, the basic speech pattern. It reflects the basic essay. So if any of you have written a basic 5-paragraph essay, you're using then the same structure that we recommend for speeches. In fact, it was used for speeches before it was used for essays. And so you go way back and you see this being taught. So first thing, introduction. Middle section, body. Last section, conclusion. Now, there's 3 parts, but they're not 3 equal parts. In general, introduction and conclusions are fairly short, and most of it is in the body. If you recall from your essay writing, what is the kind of first thing you want to do when you are writing a basic essay? Emily?
Attention getter.
Attention getter, yeah. So that's the same for the speech. You want to grab the attention of the reader. What are some ways that you could possibly do that? Something to hook them, draw them in. Lydia?
Like a command, sort of, like telling them to go through a certain situation so they can understand what the...
Yeah, imagine.
Yeah. Like,
You're walking through a hall. Suddenly, the lights are completely off. There's a scream in the distance. You turn and look, but it's all black. I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but I got your attention, right? Okay. All right, so there's a command. What else might possibly work for a good beginning of a speech? Madison?
Suspension.
Well, kind of like that. Yeah, suspense. Suspense or mystery, maybe. Yeah. What else could you use?
Humor.
Humor.
You could ask a question.
Question?
Quote.
Quotation. Good. Now, this is extremely helpful for you to avoid the worst possible way you can start anything, especially an essay or speech. It's even worse in a speech. And that's when you stand up and say, in this speech, I will tell you about the 3 blah, blah, blah. So horrible, right? Don't ever do that. Or you say, today I want to share with you. No. Grab the attention, then move into, I'm compelled to share with you these vital ideas, right? So this will save you from a bad start. The problem is you got to think of something clever. Yes, Nivea?
another one I've heard of for attention getters is a vivid description.
Yeah, a picture, kind of like I did with the black hallway for Lydia. Yep, a description. Good. The other thing you might do is try to figure out people who do good speeches, what do they do at the very beginning? You can read some speeches or listen to some. TED Talks are kind of a good place to go. Anyone listen to any TED Talks ever? Because these are people who have practiced. They've either memorized fully or memorized a lot of what they're doing. They often have a PowerPoint or a presentation. And they give them like a circle they have to stay in so they don't wander too far off. And so it's very interesting to study how people do TED Talks. But you have other options, right? If you listen to lectures at a conference, or sometimes even historical speeches are worth reading in that regard. So try to find out, okay, what's some examples of what people do? Then, of course, you have the background. And that's your context for everything. And then you may have a thesis or a question, depending on what type of speech you're giving. Then the body is variable lengths. But the most common format would be using a division of 3. So using 3 topics, or 3 reasons, or 3 aspects, 3 elements. There's something about 3s that people can relate to easily. 2 seems a little thin, right? I mean, you can build them up big, but that third one, that third reason, that third example, that third story, that third element, it really helps to feel, okay, that's complete. But if you get too many, right, you might squeeze it to 4. You might divide it in different ways. But if you get too many things, then people get lost. So somewhere in the 3 topics, plus or minus, depending on your situation. Okay, in some cases, it might kind of go like this. You have your subject, that's the thing your speech is about. What could you do a speech about? Yes?
Dogs?
Dogs. Okay, we'll go with dogs. I think you and I have a history with dogs. Okay, so your subject is dogs. Now, you might have 2 topics. So what would be 2 divisions? You could say dogs. What about dogs? Yeah.
Could have a section on cute dogs and then a section on ugly dogs. And those could be your 2 topics.
Cute dogs and ugly dogs. I can work with this. Okay, now that's only 2 topics, but you need a little more for your body. So what you could do is actually divide those. All right, and so you could talk about dogs that look cute because they look cute because of their little face and fur and ears and tail. And then you could also talk about dogs that act cute because of how they lick your noses to wake you up in the morning. And other stuff that I would not want to experience. Okay, then you look at ugly dogs. Okay, what are some
There's
hairless?
dogs.
The hairless dogs. And then just the flat out mean dogs. Okay, so now what have you done? You've actually got yourself 4 topics, right? So you can have one section on each of those. So you've expanded from 3 topics to 4. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I've even seen speeches that will continue and go beyond that in terms of being longer, more involved, or take one of those strands and go further and then compare it with a different one. But the idea then is you're somewhat flexible on the number of topics in the body. We'll get into this a lot more next week. Conclusion, then, is similar to an essay. So if you have a thesis, something you want to claim, right, that everyone should own an ugly dog, if that's your thesis, then you would restate. So you would restate the thesis, probably echo the topics. Very often up here in the background, you'll get the topics as well. Some people do this, other people don't like it because they feel like it's going to give it all away. So we don't want to give it all away. But people generally kind of like to know, what am I going to hear about? So here, rather than stating the whole topics, you might just say, it's important that we consider the range of dogness in 4 areas. Now, I've told you there's 4, but I didn't tell you what they were yet because I'm going to go do this, right? But at least you know there's 4. So, you can either enumerate just by saying how many there are going to be, or you can actually list them. That's kind of your preference. In the end, echo the topics, and then, of course, you want to make a point, right? So, what's the most significant, thing, and why? Or if it's a motivational speech, you want to end with that call to action, right? Get yourself to the, what do they even call it now, where they keep dogs? It's not the pound.
Shelter.
Shelter, yes. So now that you see the truth, get to the shelter today. Find the ugliest dog you can, embrace it with your whole heart, and live the life you are meant to have with that perfect companion. All right, so give a little, call to action. And I wouldn't do both of these, right? You would either kind of say, okay, what's the most important thing I just told you and why should you remember it? Please don't forget. And by the way, before you leave, remember, right? And then or that call to action. What's the step you can take now that you have all the information? Now, next week, we are going to begin unpacking this a little bit. And the first speech that you will have to write and deliver will be a self-introduction. So this is a good thing to kind of practice with because there's nothing you know better than yourself. Plus, it's a handy thing to be able to just tell a few things about yourself in case somebody says, so what do you do? Or what do you like? Or what do you care about? Right? And then if I'm at a conference or something and I stand up, people are always very curious. Like, who is this guy? If they don't know anything about the speaker, they would like to know some of the relevant background information about me or about whoever's speaking. Okay, so you can kind of begin to think now about what are 3 aspects of you that you could develop in the body of a self-introduction speech. What would be some things you could talk about? Yourself. Nathan?
Hobbies.
Hobbies.
Interests.
Interests, that would be close to hobbies. Be sure you don't do hobbies and interests, or it might be too close and it would be confusing. But you could go one or the other. Nevaeh?
Life stories.
Okay, something that happened to you and how you dealt with it. Yeah, that would be perfect. Good. Anything else? What you could talk
Just like where you're from, family.
Family, or yeah, that would kind of fit in the background information. One easy way to kind of get some topics going is just past, present, and future, right? So what could you talk about from your past? What could you talk about going on right now? What could you talk about in the for your future? I mean, you don't know your future, but you have dreams or hopes or expectations or fears, right? Did you have an idea, Levi?
Oh, just like personality traits and such. You could just talk about.
Oh, quirks. That's a good one. Yeah. So think about this a little bit more. We're going to pick up right here in this process of planning and writing your first speech, which will be a self-introduction speech. All right. Would you like to hear a Julius Caesar joke?
Yes.
This is a horrible joke. Caesar says to Brutus, "Hey, nice dagger you got there." And Brutus says, "Yeah, they were on sale at Trader Joe's." All right, put your papers in your notebooks. All right, so easy homework. Memorize one stanza from Mark Antony's oration from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, your choice, and practice the techniques that we worked on, see which ones work for you better or not. And then also begin to think, okay, as I start to plan self-introduction speech, how can I look at 3 different parts of myself and come up with some possibilities there. And we will pick up with the process of invention when we get to that part. All righty? All right. Well, till next week, have many nice days, especially this one, what's left of it.